Canadian support for Donald Trump higher than in last U.S. presidential election, poll finds. If you have family members that work in the oil field, 99% are pro-Trump. According to the article, it's higher, but still only 21%. Removed. Is so many people daily I talk to that are pro-Trump, but it drives me crazy when I ask them simple questions and it turns out they just repeat propaganda like puppets. It's embarrassing as a Canadian. I'm not saying everything he has on his platform is garbage, but I am saying that he is a vile, despicable, lying human, and to even consider a candidate like that to lead your country is a stain on the American population. I work with COVID-denying convoy supporting Trump fans. It's just one huge Venn circle. Disinformation knows no borders. They don't even know what his policies will be. He is a protectionist. His trade policy alone will have a negative impact on Canada. And from all the Trump supporters I know, that alone will affect them. It worries that this is how dictators gain power. Get everyone fired up that we need a revolution. Promise that he is that revolution and then end up doing terrible things in the name of revolution. They keep telling us how we need a revolution, but do we? Things are far from perfect, but let's not try to kill a fly with a sledgehammer. Angry India accuses Canada of preposterous investigation. Just to be clear, India's actions assassinating a Canadian on Canadian soil are outside of the international legal framework, aka an act of war. The intelligence Canada has on the matter comes from Five Eyes partners. Investigation by Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. To be fair, they're angry and embarrassed that they got caught. Did they consider maybe just not doing the thing? Here before the India crowd comes and says, India doesn't need Canada, when India is the top country applying for PR. 118,095 immigrants. https www.cic-news.com/2023/02/canada-in-20 HTML AMP. I wonder how India feels about the UK, USA and Australian investigations. When India gets caught doing something wrong, they always claim that they are the victim. The Indian government officials allegedly linked to homicides, extortions and coercion in Canada pose threat to public safety, says RCMP. India isn't a friend of Canada. Good to see Canada finally speaking up on this issue and fighting back. Okay, great. I think it may be time to review some of these applications as refugees or immigrants and see what's going on. Probably an unpopular and unpleasant thought, but how many assets have arrived under the cover of legitimate educations, TFWs, etc.? Its obvious screening of any sort has been cursory. At best, well, fuck. Please, let the door hit you on the way out. It would be awesome for our government to realize India is not our friend and start doing the proper diligence on people coming over to destabilize Canada. Well, best to shed light on this as much as possible. Modi was quiet when the US government backed up our accusations. Public Service Union calls for investigation into return to office mandate, CBC News. I'm all for allowing government workers to work remotely. Then we can easily spread those jobs to all provinces across the country instead of having them concentrated around Ottawa. It would appear that our governments suffer some weird kind of cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, they tax us to hinder our desire to consume fuel. Then on the other they place us in a position where we have no choice but to use fuel. This is a mental break of some sort, but with policy. These people making and enforcing this policy are acting absurdly and harmfully. Straight up. IDK why people are so obsessed to see office workers go into an office. These people do realize they're behind a computer 8 hours a day in an office. It's a waste to keep these buildings. All RTO does is make the traffic even worse. This is the thing I don't get why it isn't promoted. During COVID lockdowns we actually seen a massive decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. Smog levels in many cities around the world dropped. The lack of traffic of people having to drive into work each day had a measurable impact. Decentralized workforces in jobs that are essentially sit at a computer all day should be promoted worldwide. It will also help us meet our climate goals. This is simply a corruption story funneling huge amounts of Canadian tax dollars to private players. The feds have 28 million square meters of real estate, 7 million controlled by PSPC, 50-50 owned versus leased. It costs $2.2 billion per year to maintain that property. These are large dollar figures. 20.07 times source https://centralview.parle gc.ca/harmony/n/powerbrowser/powerbrowser2 FK equals 637,484 and global stream ID equals 3 and FB-CLID equals IWZEC0T62CCMHXNNUGXR07IG5WT5SAP2NAHXUH349 MGBGLNNUO_AEM_AU4JTN3XMQGC91AFTZLW0ZD6FFRs QARYHX RA NCAN5BV RE2FPIBPC_RLMAWOQNX53IV4EUNIEHMJKLM ZPY_ in the decision was made with no internal review as per ATIPs by the union https www.cbc.ca/news/canada/ottawa/remote-work-office-government-1.7332191 The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, who literally lobbied the government to get Canadian taxpayers to subsidize their businesses. 30 days later it happened. https chamber.ca/news/its-time-for-governments-to-bring-public-sector-employees-back-to-the-office-a-let tear from Canada's business community. The US has a fifth of their workers working remote, and guess which country is way more productive? We even have an NDP mayor going around to private businesses to try and convince them to be less productive and go back to the office. Another backwards move by Canada, which will result in losing the best employees, increasing cost and reducing productivity. All to subsidize real estate as per usual. Not to mention the 50,000 housing units that could have been developed using federal government buildings. Instead they're building whole new ones that are entirely unneeded, pulling contractors that are already in short supply away from building homes in a housing crisis. https www.theglobe-and-mail.com/canada/article-federal-office-buildings-apartments/https www.cbc.ca/news/canada/labrador/new-cray-building-update-1.7085028 The facts are this: had the ability to massively reduce costs, reduce carbon emissions, increase talent pools, reduce traffic, etc. However, the government chose to subsidize commercial real estate investors instead. That, not to mention the provinces having to shell out more taxpayer money to deal with the Increased traffic already being talked about. It's unfortunate the state of journalism today in Canada. Political corruption center stage and it goes completely ignored. The unions never asked for 100% remote for everyone. They simply asked for in office with purpose, which is the most cost-effective for all parties. That being completely rejected makes it pretty clear the government isn't working for Canadians. They are working for the lobbyists. Canada alleges much wider campaign by Modi government against Sikhs. Maybe not a bad idea to cut back on immigration from India. Canadian officials said they only recently began to grasp the magnitude of the covert campaign of violence India has waged against Sikhs as new evidence emerged from an ongoing investigation of Niger's murder that is led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police but has involved other agencies, as well as intelligence provided by the United States and other allies. Officials said the investigation has uncovered evidence of Indian government involvement in home invasions, drive-by shootings, arson and at least one additional murder. Officials described an operational chain in which Indian diplomats in Canada collect intelligence on alleged Sikh separatists that is then used by RAW to identify targets for attacks carried out by a criminal syndicate led by Lawrence Bishnoi, whose organization, the officials said, has an extensive presence in Canada. Bishnoi is imprisoned in India and could not be reached for comment. His organization has previously claimed responsibility for violent attacks in Canada. Officials said that Indian diplomats have used violence as well as threats to deny people needed immigration documents to coerce Indians living in Canada to serve as informants against Sikh activists. Canadian officials said this scheme involves Indian officials at the country's consulates in Vancouver and Toronto as well as its High Commission, the embassy equivalent, in Ottawa. Canadian officials said the collection operation was overseen by Verma, India's High Commissioner in Ottawa. Greater than officials described an operational chain in which Indian diplomats in Canada collect intelligence on alleged Sikh separatists that is then used by RAW to identify targets for attacks carried out by a criminal syndicate led by Lawrence Bishnoi, whose organization, the officials said, has an extensive presence in Canada. And how was this crime syndicate able to muster an extensive presence in Canada? Niger's killers were likely members of this gang. How did they come to Canada? Something for our government to ponder about perhaps. This is all very unnerving. India is the country that we are taking in the most immigrants from by a long shot. Why? We need to get rid of both sides of this in Canada. Root out both Modi's agents and Khalistan supporters and use the appropriate national security measures to charge, try, jail and deport them. Zero reason to allow this nonsense in Canada. Let them duke it out at home if it's such an important issue. Removed.